Tell me it's not you.
Moving to Millfield was supposed to be our fresh start. That's what I kept telling myself as I hauled the last box from the U-Haul, sweat dripping down my back in the August heat. My wife Sarah stood on our new front porch, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, directing me like I was her personal moving crew. "Nick, be careful with that one," she called out. "It has my good china." I wanted to remind her that we'd been eating off paper plates for 3 years because her good china never seemed good enough for actual use, but I bit my tongue. The promotion to senior structural engineer at Morrison & Associates came with a nice raise, and Sarah had insisted we needed a house that reflected our new status. Translation: she wanted to impress people we didn't even know yet. Our 5-year-old son Tommy ran circles around the moving boxes, his energy seemingly endless despite the heat. At least one of us was excited about this move. "Daddy, can we explore the neighborhood?" Tommy asked, tugging on my shirt. "After we get settled, buddy," I said, ruffling his dark hair. He had Sarah's eyes, but my stubborn streak, a combination that would either make him incredibly successful or drive us all crazy. That's when I noticed our neighbor watching us from his front yard. He was older, maybe early 60s, with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen more than his share of trouble. He wore a faded police department t-shirt and was watering his lawn with the focused intensity of someone who had nothing better to do. Sarah noticed him too. "I should go introduce myself," she said, smoothing down her yoga pants and adjusting her tank top. "First impressions are so important." I watched her walk across the yard, her real estate agent, smile already in place. She'd been selling houses for 5 years now, and that professional charm had become second nature. Sometimes I wondered if she ever turned it off, even with me. "Hi there," Sarah called out brightly. "I'm Sarah Barrett. We're your new neighbors." The man looked up from his hose, and I saw his expression change the moment he laid eyes on her. It wasn't attraction. It was something else entirely. Something that made my stomach clench. "Frank McGuire," he said slowly, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who'd smoked too many cigarettes and drunk too much coffee. "Retired police." "Oh, how wonderful," Sarah gushed. "It's so nice to have law enforcement in the neighborhood. Makes a person feel safe, you know?" Frank's eyes never left her face. "What's your maiden name, if you don't mind me asking?" The question caught both Sarah and me off guard. It was an odd thing to ask someone you'd just met, and I saw Sarah's smile falter for just a second. "It's Kellerman," she said. "Sarah Kellerman. Well, it was, anyway." Frank went very still. The hose slipped from his fingers, water pooling at his feet as he stared at my wife like he'd seen a ghost. "Frank?" Sarah asked. "Are you all right?" He seemed to snap back to reality, bending to pick up the hose. Fine, just, you remind me of someone I used to know, long time ago." "Oh, really? Maybe we're related. I have family all over New York State." "Maybe," Frank said, but his tones suggested he hoped that wasn't the case. I walked over, extending my hand. "Nick Barrett. I work at Morrison & Associates downtown." Frank's handshake was firm, calloused, but his attention kept drifting back to Sarah. "Listen, Nick, you seem like a decent guy. Mind if I have a word with you later, after you get settled in?" "Sure," I said, though something in his tone made me uneasy. "Is everything okay?" "Just neighborhood stuff. Nothing urgent." But the way he said it suggested otherwise. Sarah linked her arm through mine, her real estate agent smile never wavering. "Well, we should let you get back to your yard work. Thanks for the warm welcome." As we walked back to our house, I could feel Frank's eyes on us. Sarah chattered about how nice it was to have a retired police officer next door, but I barely heard her. There had been something in Frank's expression when he looked at her, recognition mixed with something that looked a lot like fear. That evening, after we'd gotten Tommy settled in his new room and Sarah had gone to take a bath, I heard a soft knock at our front door. Through the peephole, I could see Frank standing on our porch holding what looked like a folded piece of paper. I opened the door, stepping outside and closing it quietly behind me. "Sorry to bother you so late," Frank said, "but I needed to give you this." He handed me the paper. "Don't read it now. Wait until you're alone." "And Nick?" "Yeah?" "After you read it, you might want to ask your wife some questions about her past. Real, careful-like questions." The paper felt heavy in my hands, though it couldn't have weighed more than an ounce. "Frank, what's this about?" "Just be careful, son. Some people aren't who they seem to be. And sometimes the past has a way of catching up, especially when kids are involved." He walked away before I could ask anything else, leaving me standing on my front porch with a piece of paper that suddenly felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. I waited until Sarah was asleep before unfolding it. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, dated 15 years ago. The headline made my blood run cold. Local woman suspected in child's death disappears before trial. Below it was a grainy photograph of a young woman being led away in handcuffs. The face was younger, the hair was darker, but the bone structure was unmistakable. It was Sarah, or someone who looked exactly like her. The article was brief but devastating. A 5-year-old boy named Michael Kellerman had died under suspicious circumstances. His mother, Susan Kellerman, had been the prime suspect, but she'd vanished the night before her trial was set to begin. The child had died on his birthday. My hands were shaking as I read the last line. Police believe Kellerman may have assumed a new identity and could be anywhere in the country. I looked up at the ceiling, knowing Sarah was sleeping peacefully in our bed, and felt like I was looking at a complete stranger. Tommy was 5 years old. His birthday was next month. The woman I'd been married to for 8 years, the mother of my child, might be a butcher, and she had no idea that I knew. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that newspaper photo, and every time I looked at Sarah lying next to me, I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. People had doppelgangers all the time, right? And Kellerman wasn't exactly an uncommon name. But Frank's reaction kept playing in my head. The way he'd gone pale, the urgency in his voice when he'd warned me. Retired cops didn't get spooked by coincidences. The next morning, Sarah was her usual cheerful self, making pancakes for Tommy and humming while she worked. She'd always been a morning person, which had annoyed me for years, but now it felt sinister somehow. Who hummed while making breakfast if they had blood on their hands? You look tired, honey, she said, sliding a plate in front of me. Moving day really took it out of you, didn't it? Yeah, I managed. Just couldn't get comfortable in the new bed. It'll take some getting used to. She kissed the top of my head, and I had to fight the urge to pull away. I'm going to take Tommy to check out the local elementary school today. Want to come with us? Can't. First day at the new office. You know how it is. Of course. My successful husband climbing the corporate ladder. She beamed at me with what I'd always thought was pride, but now wondered might be calculation. We're so lucky, aren't we? New house, new neighborhood, fresh start for all of us. Fresh start. The words echoed in my head as I drove to work. Is that what this was for her? Another fresh start, another identity, another life built on the ashes of the last one. Morrison and Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass office building downtown. My new office had a window, a significant upgrade from my cubicle at my old job, and under normal circumstances I would have been thrilled. But I spent most of that first day staring at my computer screen, researching everything I could find about the Kellerman case. The details were sparse. Michael Kellerman had been found dead in his bedroom on the morning of his 5th birthday. The official cause of death was listed as accidental suffocation, but the police report mentioned inconsistencies in the mother's story and evidence suggesting the scene may have been staged. Susan Kellerman had maintained her innocence throughout the investigation, claiming she'd found Michael unresponsive when she went to wake him for his birthday breakfast. But neighbors reported hearing arguing the night before, and a child psychologist who'd interviewed Michael weeks earlier noted signs of emotional distress. The case had fallen apart when Susan disappeared. Her car was found abandoned at a bus station 3 states away, but there was no record of her purchasing a ticket. It was as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. Until now, maybe. Barrett? I looked up to find my new supervisor, Janet Morrison, standing in my doorway. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd built the company from nothing and had little patience for slackers. Yes, ma'am? Everything all right? You seem distracted. Just first-day nerves, I lied, still getting oriented. Well, orient faster. I've got the Henderson project on your desk. Due Friday. She paused, studying my face. You sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. If only she knew how accurate that assessment was. That evening, I found Frank working in his garage when I got home. He looked up as I approached, and I could see the question in his eyes. We need to talk, I said. He nodded, setting down his tools. Your wife home? Taking Tommy to soccer practice? Good. Come on in. Frank's garage was meticulously organized, tools hanging in perfect rows, workbench clean enough to perform surgery on. It was the garage of a man who liked control, who needed order in his world. You read it. he said. It wasn't a question. Is it her? Frank was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. I worked that case, Nick. 15 years on the force, and it was the one that haunted me. That little boy? He shook his head. I'd bet my pension that your wife is Susan Kellerman. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. But you can't prove it. Not yet. She's good. I'll give her that. New identity, new life, probably new social security number. But I never forgot that face. Frank's expression hardened. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. I mean, what can I do if she really did? If Michael really was... I couldn't finish the sentence. Your boy's 5 years old, Frank said quietly. Same age Michael was when he died. And his birthday's coming up, isn't it? My blood went cold. How did you know that? I pay attention. It's what cops do. Frank leaned against his workbench. Look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But if I'm right and something happens to Tommy... Nothing's going to happen to Tommy, I said quickly. She loves him. I know she loves him. I'm sure she loved Michael too, right up until she didn't. The next few days passed in a blur of paranoia and second-guessing. I found myself watching Sarah constantly, looking for signs of what? Violent intentions? Psychological instability? She seemed perfectly normal. Loving mother, devoted wife, successful real estate agent. But then again, if Frank was right, she'd been playing this role for years. I started paying closer attention to her phone calls, her schedule, her interactions with Tommy. She was planning his birthday party with her usual enthusiasm, making lists and calling vendors and getting excited about the theme he'd chosen, superheroes. It all seemed so normal, so maternal. But there were little things that bothered me. The way she sometimes stared off into space with an expression I couldn't read. How she'd grown quiet whenever Tommy mentioned missing his friends from our old neighborhood. The fact that she'd been so insistent about moving to Millfield specifically, even though it meant a longer commute for both of us. And then there was her past. In 8 years of marriage, Sarah had told me remarkably little about her childhood, her family, her life before we met. I'd always assumed she was just a private person, but now I wondered if there simply wasn't much to tell, because Susan Kellerman's past had died with Michael. A week after Frank's revelation, I was working late when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Tommy's asleep. Come home soon. I miss you. Under normal circumstances, it would have seemed sweet. Now it felt ominous, like a spider inviting a fly into its web. I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, past houses where families were settling in for the evening, where children were safe in their beds, and parents didn't have to worry about whether their spouse might be a butcher. The normalcy of it all felt like a mockery. Sarah was waiting for me in the living room, wearing the silk nightgown I'd bought her for our anniversary. She'd lit candles and opened a bottle of wine, all the trappings of romance that would have thrilled me a week ago. You've been so tense lately, she said, moving close to me. I thought maybe we could reconnect. Her hands were on my chest, her lips close to mine, and all I could think about was whether those same hands had pressed a pillow over a 5-year-old boy's face. Whether those lips had lied to police officers and grieving relatives and a husband who'd loved her completely. Sarah, I said, stepping back, we need to talk. Her smile faltered. About what? About your past, about your family, about who you really are. For just a moment, so brief I might have imagined it, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear? Anger? Calculation? But then her expression smoothed back into confused concern. Nick, what's gotten into you? You're scaring me. Am I? Or are you scared because you know exactly what I'm talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. But she'd taken a step back, and her voice had gone carefully neutral. Has someone been telling you things about me? That neighbor of ours, maybe? He's been watching our house, you know. I've seen him. Of course, she'd noticed Frank's surveillance. If she really was Susan Kellerman, she'd have developed finely tuned instincts for detecting threats. Just tell me the truth, Sarah. Whatever it is, whatever you've done, we can work through it. But I need to know who I'm married to. She stared at me for a long moment, and I held my breath, waiting for a confession, a breakdown, something that would give me clarity. Instead, she laughed. Oh, Nick, you're being ridiculous. I'm Sarah Barrett, your wife, Tommy's mother. I sell houses and make terrible coffee and sing off key in the shower. What more do you want to know? But her laughter sounded forced, and when she turned to blow out the candles, I saw her hands trembling. That night I lay awake listening to her breathe, wondering if the woman next to me was a grieving mother who'd lost everything, or a butcher who'd gotten away with homicide and was planning to do it again. Tommy's birthday was 3 days away. I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was eating me alive, turning every interaction with Sarah into a psychological minefield. I needed proof, one way or the other. The next morning, after Sarah left to show a house and Tommy was at his new day camp, I called in sick to work and drove to the public library. If Sarah really was Susan Kellerman, there had to be more information somewhere. Police reports, court documents, newspaper archives, something that would give me the evidence I needed. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes and infinite patience, helped me navigate the newspaper database. We found dozens of articles about the Kellerman case, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. Michael Kellerman had been a shy, sensitive child who'd been having behavioral problems at school. His teacher had noted that he seemed anxious and withdrawn in the weeks before his death. A school counselor had recommended family therapy, but Susan had refused, claiming her son was just going through a phase. The night before Michael died, neighbors had heard shouting from the Kellerman house. One witness described it as a woman screaming at someone to stop crying. Another reported seeing Susan pacing in her backyard at 2 a.m., talking to herself and acting agitated. The physical evidence was deeply incriminating but inconclusive. Michael had been found in his bed with his favorite stuffed animal, positioned as if he'd died peacefully in his sleep. But the medical examiner noted petechial hemorrhaging in his eyes and fingernail marks on his throat that were consistent with manual strangulation. Susan's story had changed multiple times during police interviews. First, she'd claimed to find him unresponsive when she went to wake him for his birthday breakfast. Later, she admitted she'd checked on him during the night because he'd been having nightmares. Finally, she'd broken down and said she couldn't remember what had happened, that she'd been drinking and taking prescription medication for anxiety. The case had been building toward a homicide conviction when Susan vanished. Her disappearance had been carefully planned. She'd withdrawn money from multiple ATMs over several weeks, sold jewelry and other valuables, and researched how to obtain false identification documents on her computer. But it was the last article that made my blood run cold. It was a follow-up piece published 5 years after Michael's death, on what would have been his 10th birthday. The reporter had interviewed Michael's father, David Kellerman, who'd been deployed overseas when his son died. She was a good mother when things were easy, David had said. But when Michael started having problems, when he needed more patience and understanding, Susan couldn't handle it. She saw his struggles as a reflection of her failure as a parent, and she couldn't forgive him for that. The article included a photo of David and Michael taken shortly before David's deployment. Michael had dark hair and serious eyes that looked remarkably like Tommy's. I sat in that library for hours, printing article after article, building a case file that would have made Frank proud. By the time I was done, I had no doubt that my wife was Susan Kellerman, and that she'd ended her first son when his needs became too overwhelming for her to handle. The question now was whether she was planning to do the same thing to Tommy. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. Should I confront her with the evidence, call the police, take Tommy and run? Every option seemed fraught with danger. Sarah's car was in the driveway when I got home, and I could hear her voice coming from the kitchen. She was on the phone, speaking in the bright, professional tone she used with clients. No, that won't work, she was saying. It has to be Saturday. That's the only day that makes sense. Saturday. Tommy's birthday. I crept closer to the kitchen, staying out of sight. I understand your concerns, but trust me, I know what I'm doing. I've been planning this for a long time. Her voice dropped lower. Everything has to be perfect. There can't be any mistakes this time. This time. The words sent ice through my veins. Look, I have to go. My husband just got home, but we're still on for Saturday, right? Good. I'll see you then. I heard her footsteps approaching and quickly ducked into the living room, pretending to sort through the mail. Sarah appeared in the doorway, smiling brightly. Hi, honey. You're home early. Feeling better? A little, I managed. Who was that on the phone? Oh, just a client. You know how demanding they can be. She moved closer, studying my face with concern that seemed genuine. You still look pale. Maybe you should take another day off tomorrow. Maybe I will. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, I snuck out to Frank's garage. He was waiting for me as if he'd known I'd come. You look like heck, he said. I've been researching the Kellerman case. And it's her. It's definitely her. I handed him the stack of printouts. And I think she's planning to do it again. Frank read through the articles with the methodical attention of a career cop. When he finished, his expression was grim. This is good work, Nick. Circumstantial, but compelling. The question is, what do we do about it? Can we go to the police? With what? A 15-year-old case and a bunch of newspaper articles? They'll listen politely and file it under interesting but unprovable. Frank shook his head. We need more. Something current, something concrete. Like what? Evidence that she's planning to hurt Tommy. A confession. Something that proves intent. And how do we get that? Frank was quiet for a moment, considering. There might be a way, but it's risky. And if we're wrong about her, we're not wrong. If we're wrong, he continued, we could destroy an innocent woman's life and traumatize your son in the process. And if we're right and we do nothing, Tommy dies. The words hung between us like a death sentence. Frank nodded slowly. All right then, here's what we're going to do. Frank's plan was simple, but dangerous. He would call Sarah, pretending to be a private investigator hired by David Kellerman to track down his ex-wife. He'd claim to have evidence that she was living in Millfield under a false identity, and he'd demand to meet with her to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. She'll panic, Frank explained. And when people panic, they make mistakes. They reveal things they meant to keep hidden. What if she runs? Then we follow her, and we call the police with a credible report of a fugitive fleeing with a minor child. What if she doesn't panic? What if she calls your bluff? Then maybe we're wrong about her. But Frank's expression suggested he didn't believe that for a second. We decided to make the call on Friday morning, the day before Tommy's birthday. That would give us time to react to whatever Sarah did, but not enough time for her to plan an elaborate response. I went to work that Friday morning and tried to act normal, but I felt like I was walking through a minefield. Every conversation with a colleague, every email, every routine task felt surreal when measured against what I knew was coming. At exactly 10 a.m., Frank made the call. I was sitting in my office, pretending to review blueprints, when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Need to talk. Come home now. My hands were shaking as I gathered my things. This was it. Whatever happened next would determine whether my family survived intact or whether everything I'd built over the past 8 years was about to come crashing down. The drive home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. When I pulled into our driveway, Sarah was waiting for me on the front porch. Her face was pale, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. We need to leave, she said before I'd even gotten out of the car. Pack a bag, get Tommy from camp. We're leaving town today. Why? What's wrong? Someone's been asking questions about me, about my past. Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I won't let them destroy what we've built here. Sarah, slow down. What kind of questions? The kind that could ruin everything, she snapped. Then, seeming to realize she'd revealed too much, she forced a smile. Look, I made some mistakes when I was younger. Nothing serious, but you know how people love to gossip. I think it's better if we just start fresh somewhere else. What about Tommy's birthday tomorrow? Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt maybe, or regret. We'll celebrate somewhere else. Make it an adventure. And my job? Your clients? We can't just abandon our lives because someone's spreading gossip. We can, and we will. Her voice had gone cold, and for the first time since I'd known her, Sarah sounded like someone who was used to running away. I've done it before. The admission hung between us like a confession. I stared at my wife, this woman I'd loved and trusted and built a life with, and realized I was looking at a complete stranger. Done what before, Sarah? She seemed to realize what she'd said, and her expression shifted back to desperate pleading. Nick, please, I need you to trust me. Pack a bag, get Tommy, and let's go. We can figure everything else out later. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me the truth. The truth? She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. The truth is that I love you and Tommy more than anything in this world, and I won't let anyone take that away from me. Not again. Not again. The words confirmed what I'd already known but had been hoping against hope was wrong. Sarah was Susan Kellerman, and she'd already lost one family because of what she'd done. The question now was whether she was planning to make sure it didn't happen twice. Not again? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean, not again? Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: panic, calculation, resignation, and finally, a cold determination that chilled me to the bone. You know, don't you? She said quietly. That old man next door told you. There was no point in denying it. Are you Susan Kellerman? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at me with eyes that seemed to be weighing her options. When she finally spoke, her voice was eerily calm. Susan Kellerman died 15 years ago. I'm Sarah Barrett now. I've been Sarah Barrett for 8 years, and I'm a good Sarah Barrett. I'm a good wife and a good mother, and I won't let anyone take that away from me. What happened to Michael? Michael was sick, she said, and for the first time I heard genuine pain in her voice. Not physically sick, but broken somehow. He cried constantly, had tantrums that lasted for hours, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The doctor said it was just a phase, that he'd grow out of it, but it was getting worse. So you ended him. I loved him. The words exploded out of her with such force that I took a step back. I loved him more than my own life, but I couldn't watch him suffer anymore, and I couldn't let David come home and see what his son had become. He was 5 years old, Sarah. He was a child who needed help, not what you did to him. You don't understand. You weren't there. You didn't see him that last night, scratching at his arms until they bled, screaming that the monsters were coming to get him. I tried everything, therapy, medication, changing his diet, moving his bedroom. Nothing worked. So you decided he'd be better off dead. I decided he'd be better off at peace. Her voice had gone soft, almost dreamy. And he was. When it was over, he looked so peaceful, like he was finally free from whatever was tormenting him. I felt sick. This woman, this person I'd shared a bed with for 8 years, was calmly describing ending the life of a child, her own child, as an act of mercy. And now you think Tommy needs the same kind of peace? Tommy's not sick like Michael was. Tommy's perfect. But if they take me away, if they put me in prison, what happens to him then? Foster care? Growing up knowing his mother was a butcher? She shook her head. I won't let that happen to him. So you're planning to end him too. I'm planning to protect him. From them, from the truth, from a life of pain and shame and abandonment. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. If we have to leave this world together, at least we'll leave it as a family. The casual way she talked about ending our son's life made my vision blur with rage. This wasn't grief or desperation. It was the calculated planning of someone who'd already done it once and was prepared to do it again. You're insane, I said. I'm a mother, and sometimes being a mother means making impossible choices to protect your children. Protecting them? You're talking about ending them. I'm talking about saving them from something worse than death. A life without love, without family, without hope. She stepped closer to me, and I could see the fervent conviction in her eyes. You don't understand because you're not a mother. You don't know what it's like to love someone so much that you'd rather see them dead than see them destroyed. I thought about Tommy at day camp, probably making crafts for his birthday party, excited about turning 6, planning his future with the boundless optimism of childhood. The idea of Sarah's hands around his throat, of his confusion and terror in those final moments, made me want to vomit. Where is he? I asked. Safe. Sarah, where is Tommy? I picked him up from camp an hour ago. He's somewhere you'll never find him, somewhere they'll never find him. And tomorrow, on his birthday, we're going to have the most wonderful party. Just the 3 of us. You're not going to hurt him. I'm going to love him, forever and always. Just like I loved Michael. I pulled out my phone, but Sarah was faster. She grabbed it from my hands and threw it against the garage door, where it shattered into pieces. I can't let you ruin this, Nick. I know you think you're protecting Tommy, but you don't understand what's at stake here. Then explain it to me. They want to take him away from me. The police, the courts, the social workers. They want to tear our family apart and put my baby in the system where he'll be mistreated, neglected, and forgotten. I've seen what happens to children in foster care. I've seen what the world does to innocents. That's not going to happen. It's already happening. That man next door has been watching us, taking pictures, building a case. And now there's some private investigator asking questions, digging into my past. How long do you think it'll be before they show up with handcuffs and a warrant? We can fight it. We can get lawyers. Prove that you're a good mother now, that you've changed. Changed? She laughed bitterly. I ended my first child, Nick. There's no coming back from that. There's no redemption, no second chances, no happily ever after. There's just the choice between losing Tommy to the system or keeping him with me forever. Keeping him with you forever by ending his life. By loving him enough to spare him the pain of living without his mother. The twisted logic of it, the way she'd convinced herself that homicide was an act of love, made me realize that reasoning with her was impossible. Sarah Susan had crossed a line 15 years ago that had fundamentally changed who she was. She wasn't a grieving mother anymore. She was a butcher who'd found a way to justify her actions and was prepared to end again. Where is he, Sarah? I told you, he's safe. If you hurt him, You'll what? Call the police? They're probably already on their way. She glanced at her watch, which means we don't have much time left. Time for what? To say goodbye? Her voice had gone soft again, almost gentle. I know this isn't what you wanted, Nick. I know you probably hate me now. But I need you to understand that everything I've done, everything I'm going to do is out of love. This isn't love, this is madness. Maybe they're the same thing. I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder. Frank must have called the police after Sarah's panicked reaction to his phone call. Help was coming, but would it be in time? Sarah, please, tell me where Tommy is, and we can work this out. Whatever you've done, whatever you're planning, it's not too late to stop. It was too late the moment that old man recognized me. It was too late the moment you started asking questions about my past. She looked sad, almost regretful. I really did love you, Nick. These 8 years with you and Tommy were the happiest of my life. I hope you can remember that after what? But she was already moving, heading for the back door of our house. I lunged after her, but she was faster, slamming the door and turning the deadbolt before I could reach it. The sirens were getting closer, but I couldn't wait for the police. Tommy was somewhere in that house, and Sarah was planning to end him, maybe had already started the process. I ran around to the front door, but it was locked too. The windows on the first floor were all latched from the inside. I was standing in my front yard, frantically trying to figure out how to get into my own house, when Frank appeared at my side. Where is she? He asked. Inside. She has Tommy in there somewhere. The police are 2 minutes out. That might be too long. Frank nodded grimly and pulled a crowbar from behind his back. Then we go in now. The front door splintered under Frank's assault, the deadbolt tearing through the doorframe with a crack like thunder. We burst into the house, calling Tommy's name, but there was no answer. Check upstairs, Frank said. I'll take the basement. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Tommy's room was empty, his bed neatly made, his birthday presents stacked on his dresser waiting for tomorrow's party that would never come. Our bedroom was empty too, but Sarah's closet had been ransacked, clothes scattered everywhere as if she'd packed in a hurry. Nick! Frank's voice echoed from the basement. Down here! I ran downstairs to find Frank standing at the entrance to our unfinished basement, his face pale. The basement was dark, but I could see a faint light coming from the far corner, near the water heater. Sarah? I called out. Sarah, I'm coming down. Stay back! Her voice was sharp with panic. Don't come any closer or I'll do it right now! I could see them now, huddled in the corner behind the water heater. Sarah was sitting on the floor with Tommy in her lap, her arms wrapped around him like a protective embrace. But there was something wrong with the picture. Tommy was too still, too quiet. Tommy, I called out. Tommy, are you okay? He's sleeping, Sarah said. I gave him something to help him relax. He was scared, and I didn't want him to be scared. What did you give him? Just something to make it easier for both of us. I stepped closer, and Sarah tightened her grip on Tommy. In the dim light, I could see that his lips had a bluish tinge, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. Sarah, he needs a doctor. Whatever you gave him, it's too much. It's exactly the right amount. In a few minutes, he'll just drift away, peacefully, painlessly, and then I'll take the rest, and we'll be together forever. The rest of what? She held up a prescription bottle nearly empty. Sleeping pills. I've been saving them for months. The police sirens were right outside now, car doors slamming, voices shouting orders. But they seemed very far away compared to the sight of my son dying in his mother's arms. Sarah, please, give him to me. Let me get him to a hospital. I can't do that. I won't let them take him away from me. They won't take him away. I promise. You can't promise that. You don't have that kind of power. Her voice was getting weaker, and I realized she'd probably already taken some of the pills herself. But I do. I have the power to keep him safe forever. Police! Everyone out of the house now! Frank appeared at the top of the basement stairs. Down here! He called out. We need paramedics! The basement suddenly filled with flashlight beams and shouting voices. Sarah blinked in the harsh light, looking confused and disoriented. Stay back! She screamed. Stay away from us! But the pills were taking effect, and her grip on Tommy was loosening. I saw my chance and dove forward, grabbing Tommy from her arms just as she collapsed backward against the water heater. Tommy was limp in my arms, his breathing so faint I could barely feel it. I need an ambulance! I shouted. Now! The paramedics were already on their way down the stairs, equipment in hand. They took Tommy from me and immediately began working on him, checking his pulse, his breathing, his pupils. What did she give him? One of them asked. I grabbed the prescription bottle from where Sarah had dropped it. Zolpidem, sleeping pills. How many? I don't know. The bottle's almost empty. They loaded Tommy onto a stretcher and rushed him upstairs while another team worked on Sarah. I followed Tommy's stretcher, my entire world reduced to the sound of his labored breathing and the urgent voices of the paramedics. Is he going to be okay? I asked. We're doing everything we can, one of them said, but we need to get him to the hospital immediately. As they loaded Tommy into the ambulance, I caught a glimpse of Frank talking to the police officers, probably explaining how we'd figured out Sarah's real identity and what she'd been planning. But I didn't care about any of that anymore. All I cared about was the small, still figure on the stretcher and whether I was about to lose the most important thing in my life. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and we raced through the streets toward the hospital, sirens wailing, while I held my son's hand and prayed to whatever gods might be listening that I wouldn't lose him the way David Kellerman had lost Michael, that Sarah wouldn't succeed in destroying another family with her twisted version of love. Tommy survived. After 18 hours in the ICU, pumped full of activated charcoal and IV fluids, he opened his eyes and asked for pancakes. The doctors said it was a miracle. Another hour, maybe less, and the overdose would have been fatal. Sarah wasn't so lucky. Or maybe she was, depending on your perspective. She'd taken enough pills to end herself twice over, but the paramedics had gotten to her in time. She spent 3 days in a medically induced coma before waking up to find herself handcuffed to a hospital bed with a police officer stationed outside her room. I was there when she regained consciousness, sitting in the chair beside her bed, waiting for answers that I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Nick! Her voice was hoarse, confused. What happened? Where's Tommy? Tommy's alive, no thanks to you. The memories came flooding back, and I watched her face crumble as she realized her plan had failed. Is he okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally, he's going to need therapy for years to understand why his mother tried to end him. I wasn't trying to end him. I was trying to save him. From what? From having a life? From growing up? From being happy? She turned her face away from me, staring at the wall. You wouldn't understand. Then make me understand. Explain to me how ending the lives of your children is an act of love. For a long moment, she was quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. When I was 7 years old, my mother abandoned me at a gas station, just drove away and never came back. I spent the next 11 years bouncing between foster homes and group facilities, and I swore that if I ever had children of my own, I would never, ever let them go through what I went through. So you decided to end them instead. I decided to protect them from a world that destroys innocence and abandons the vulnerable. She looked at me then, and her eyes were filled with a desperate need for understanding. When Michael started having problems, when the doctors said he might need institutional care, I knew what that meant. I knew what happens to children who get labeled as difficult or damaged. They get thrown away, just like I was. That's not what would have happened, isn't it? How long would you have stayed married to me if Michael had never gotten better? How long before the stress and the sleepless nights and the constant crisis management drove you away? And then what? A custody battle? Shared visitation? Michael spending half his time with strangers who didn't understand him? You don't know that would have happened. I know that people leave. Everyone leaves eventually. Parents, husbands, friends, they all leave when things get too hard. When the cost of staying becomes higher than the cost of going. Her voice broke. But death is forever. Death means never being abandoned again. The twisted logic of it made me feel sick. Sarah had been so damaged by her own abandonment that she'd convinced herself homicide was preferable to the possibility of rejection. What about Tommy? He wasn't sick like Michael. He was happy, healthy, normal. Why did you want to end him too? Because they were going to take him away from me. Once they figured out who I really was, once they arrested me for what happened to Michael, Tommy would have gone into the system. And I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let him grow up thinking his mother was a monster who abandoned him. So instead, you decided to make sure he'd grow up thinking his mother was a monster who tried to end his life. He wouldn't have grown up at all. That was the point. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. We would have been together forever, Nick. A family that could never be broken apart. I stared at this woman I'd loved for 8 years. This person who'd shared my bed and raised my child and built a life with me based on lies and homicide, and I felt nothing but disgust. You're not a mother, I said. You're a butcher who happened to give birth. And the only reason you're alive right now is so you can spend the rest of your life in prison thinking about the children you destroyed in the name of love. I left her there, crying and calling my name, and walked out of that hospital room for the last time. The trial was a media circus. Sarah, the court refused to acknowledge her false identity, so she was tried as Susan Kellerman, pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Her lawyers painted her as a victim of childhood trauma, who'd suffered a psychotic break, a loving mother driven to desperate measures by fear and mental illness. The prosecution told a different story. They portrayed her as a cold, calculating butcher who'd ended the life of one child and attempted to harm another, who'd spent 15 years living a lie and planning her next crime. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about her ability to maintain a false identity, hold down a job, and function normally in society, evidence that she was fully aware of her actions and their consequences. I testified for the prosecution. Sitting in that witness box, looking out at the packed courtroom, I told the jury about Sarah's calm demeanor when she described her plans, her calculated preparation, her complete lack of remorse. I told them about finding Tommy dying in her arms and hearing her describe homicide as an act of love. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Homicide in the first degree for Michael Kellerman. Attempted homicide in the first degree for Tommy Barrett. Kidnapping, child endangerment, identity fraud. The judge sentenced her to life without the possibility of parole. Sarah showed no emotion when the verdict was read. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, as if she was already somewhere else entirely. But when they led her away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one last time. I loved them, she mouthed. I loved them both. Maybe she did in her own twisted way. But love without sanity, without boundaries, without respect for the autonomy and dignity of the beloved, isn't really love at all. It's possession. It's control. It's the kind of selfish need that destroys everything it touches. 6 months after the trial ended, Tommy and I moved to Oregon. Fresh start, new identities. Legal ones this time. I took a job with a small engineering firm in Portland. And Tommy enrolled in first grade under my maiden name, which I'd legally changed back to after the divorce. Frank visited us once, driving cross-country in his retirement. He brought Tommy a baseball glove and taught him how to throw a curveball in our backyard while I made dinner. Over beers that evening, after Tommy had gone to bed, Frank asked me how I was doing. Better, I said. Some days are harder than others, but we're getting through it. And Tommy? He's resilient. Kids are amazing that way. He knows his mother did something bad, something that hurt him, but he doesn't really understand the full scope of it yet. His therapist says that's probably for the best. What will you tell him when he's older? I'd been thinking about that question for months. The truth, I guess, that his mother was sick, that she loved him but didn't know how to love him properly, and that sometimes people do terrible things even when they think they're doing the right thing. That's a hard truth for a kid to carry. All truths are hard, but lies are worse. I took a long drink of beer, thinking about the 8 years I'd lived with a woman I'd never really known. I spent my whole marriage believing in a fiction. I won't let Tommy grow up the same way. Frank nodded. You're a good father, Nick. That boy's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him too. Luckier than I deserve. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of our new neighborhood. Kids playing in the street, dogs barking, lawnmowers running. Normal sounds of normal lives lived by normal people who'd never had to worry about whether their spouse was planning to homicide their children. Do you ever think about her? Frank asked. Every day. Not with love, not anymore, but I think about her. I wonder if she really believes what she did was right, or if she knows somewhere deep down that she's a monster. Does it matter? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe the only thing that matters is that she can't hurt anyone else. And that Tommy's safe. And that Tommy's safe. After Frank left, I went to check on Tommy before going to bed myself. He was sleeping peacefully, his new stuffed dinosaur clutched in his arms, his breathing deep and regular. In the soft light from the hallway, he looked so young, so vulnerable, so trusting. I thought about Sarah's words in the hospital, about her twisted justification for homicide. She'd claimed to be protecting him from abandonment, from rejection, from the possibility of pain. But pain is part of life. Disappointment, loss, heartbreak, they're all part of the human experience. And the answer to life's inevitable suffering isn't to end life itself. The answer is to love people enough to let them live their own lives, make their own choices, face their own challenges, to be there for them when they fall, not to prevent them from ever taking the risk of standing up. Sarah had never learned that lesson. Her own abandonment had damaged her so severely that she couldn't conceive of love without control, protection without possession. She'd confused her need to never be left alone with her children's need to grow up safe and free. And 2 children had paid the price for her confusion. I kissed Tommy's forehead and whispered a promise I intended to keep. I'll never let anyone hurt you again, but I'll never stop you from living either. He stirred in his sleep, smiling at some dream I hoped was better than the reality he'd already survived. In the morning, we'd get up and make pancakes and go to the park and live our lives like the normal father and son we were trying to become. We'd build new memories to replace the damaged ones, new traditions to celebrate survival and hope and the simple miracle of being alive. And somewhere in a maximum security prison, Sarah would wake up in her cell and remember what she'd lost when she'd chosen homicide over letting go. That was her punishment, and it was more fitting than any death sentence could have been. To live with the knowledge that her children, both of them, would have been better off if she'd simply walked away. To know that her version of love had been the most destructive force in their lives. To understand, finally, that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is disappear. Tommy and I were living proof that life goes on, that families can heal, that love doesn't have to be possessive to be real. We were the revenge she'd never see coming and could never escape. The revenge of happiness, of normalcy, of a child who'd survived her twisted version of protection and thrived in its absence. Every day we spent together, every milestone Tommy reached, every moment of joy and laughter and ordinary family life was a testament to the failure of her final plan. She'd tried to save us from abandonment by destroying us completely. Instead, she'd abandoned us herself and given us the chance to build something better from the wreckage she'd left behind.